And I'm going to focus on two forms of potential dose, two common forms of potential dose. One is called the cumulative dose, and the other is called the average daily dose. They're just two different forms of potential dose. For the cumulative dose, exposure concentrations, are integrated over time. And the term cumulative dose is synonymous with cumulative exposure. So I'll show you an example of cumulative dose on the next slide. Average daily dose, termed ADD, is calculated or determined when exposure concentrations are combined with exposure factors. And these are usually divided through by body weight, so they're body weight normalized. And I'll show you an example of that too. But let's start with cumulative dose. The concentrations are summed over a specified period of time. The units are therefore concentration time. For example, microgram per cubic meter of aerosols, microgram per cubic meter days. It turns out, or it could be like ppm days or ppb days. It turns out that many occupational health studies use cumulative dose to assess exposure, especially in epidemiological studies of cancer risks, where lifetime exposure or cumulative exposure is of interest. So here are three examples. The average daily concentration of fine particles, PM2.5, in air of a community is 10 microgram per cubic meter. A person spends 425 days in the community. What is their cumulative exposure to fine particles in units of micrograms per cubic meter days? Pretty straightforward. We're going to multiply the exposure concentration by the number of days, 10 times 425, and we get 4,250 microgram per cubic meter days. That's the cumulative exposure over that year period. Here's the second example. It has to do with smoking. So in health studies, observational health studies, epi-studies of risks of smoking, a common metric of exposure is called pack years. Pack years is an expression of cumulative dose, where a pack is the number of cigarette packages smoked each day, and years represents the number of years that they smoked at that rate. So, for instance, a person smokes 0.5 packs every day, and they do that for 3 years. That means they would multiply these two together, they have 1.5 pack years of cumulative exposure. Okay? Sure, we could put that in cigarettes. So like if a package of cigarettes is 20 cigarettes, and that means they smoke 10 a day, right? And then, 365 days in a year, 3,650 cigarettes a year, times 3 years, they have something like 10,000, cigarette days or something. But anyway, I digress. Example number 3. A person works in a chemical manufacturing facility that produces a chemical called chloroprene. They are exposed to 250 ppb chloroprene while at work. This is a gas. They work 200 8-hour shifts per year. What is their annual cumulative dose of chloroprene? Well, we would say in ppb hours. I should put that in there. So 250 ppb is the exposure concentration. 200 days per year they work. Every day they work work for 8 hours. So we go 250 ppb times 200 days per year times 8 hours per day, and we get a cumulative exposure of 400,000 ppb hours each year that they work at that rate and at that exposure concentration. So their annual cumulative chloroprene dose is 400,000 ppb hours.